Well, the Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz is preparing to release his highly anticipated report on the FBI and the DOJ's handling of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. That report expected soon. It comes as President Trump is calling for the department to allow Congress access to documents linked to an FBI informant who spoke to some of his advisors during the 2016 presidential campaign. Joining me right now is House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. Mr. Chairman, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you this
morning. A lot
of
conversation about this informant on a lot of other channels and in all sorts of newspapers. What can you tell us in terms of what went on?
Well, I can tell you that nobody was ever interested in an informant. We asked for specific documents that we still have not received from the Department of Justice. So they continue to leak out things about this informant. And we don't know if there's one informant or more informants because there's so much out there now. It's really getting tough to follow. And all we're asking for is give us the documentation that you used to start this investigation.
And what you've been investigating is what exactly launched an investigation into so-called collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians. Is that right?
Yeah. So remember, we discovered that the dossier was used. So this is the dirt that they dug up that the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democrats used, and then it got to the FBI, and the FBI used it in a FISA. So we're trying to get to the bottom of, what else was used in that FISA, because you have many people in the Department of Justice who are claiming that we're wrong. So if we're wrong, show us the information.
Well, Jim Comey was interviewed by our own Bret Baier recently. You know that. And during that interview, Jim Comey said that there was more than just the dossier. Let's roll that clip. Listen to this, Mr. Chairman.
You called the dossier unverified, salacious. Why did you use that to the FISA court to ask for surveillance for Carter Page? Not only use it, but you led with it. A bulk of that FISA application deals with that dossier. Why?
Yeah, that's not my recollection, Brett. And I don't know that the FISA application has been released. My recollection was it was part of a broader mosaic of facts that were laid before the FISA judge to obtain a FISA warrant.
Broader mosaic of facts, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we're looking for the pieces to Mr. Comey and the FBI's mosaic. So, they've continued to say that this didn't happen, even though we've had career prosecutors go and evaluate this. We released a memo that we made public for all of Americans to see that they had used this dirt that was bought and paid for, not verified before a FISA court. And then they continue to claim, no, don't look here. There's no FISA abuse at all. And they're in total denial. So we have a right to get the information. If James Comey and many others and people that are currently at the Department of Justice today continue to say there's nothing to see here. Well, if there's nothing to see here, show us the documents that we're asking for. They refuse to do it.
And how many documents have you gotten so far from the 1.2 million documents that you've requested?
Well, that's actually a different request related to the Clinton email investigation.
Okay.
We have been very specific. We think there's only a handful of documents left that we'd like to see, but we never get the full story.
The Department of Justice told Fox News they've invited you to the DOJ, and you haven't responded, or are you aware of this invitation to go to the DOJ?
Yeah, so they continued to leak. So we had what I thought was a productive meeting. And then after that meeting, they've done nothing but leak and leak and leak. Now, we don't know exactly who it is over at the Department of Justice or FBI. I'm not pinning any blame on people, but we're not going to go to another meeting where we don't get documents and then the meeting leaks out. And, they were trying, and this should make people very suspicious. They were trying to get Mr. Gowdy and I to go on Friday to the Department of Justice for supposedly another briefing. We said, look, unless we're going to get documents, we found out Thursday night they were not going to provide documents, so therefore we're not going to go. Now, if you look what happened on Friday night, probably the mother of all leaks of all time to two major newspapers that came out late Friday night.
Yeah. That's
now,
what I want to...
had Mr. Gowdy and I went to that meeting, you can bet they would have tried to pin that on us.
That's what I want to ask you about. Stay with us. Devin Nunes, we'll be right back with more on that. Welcome back. We are back with this exclusive interview with House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. And Mr. Chairman, a moment ago, before we went to break, you said it was the mother of all leaks conducted by the Department of Justice. What were you referring to?
Well, there were two mainstream media outlets on Friday night that had lots and lots and lots of details. if any of those details are correct. So remember, we don't have any documents. We can't confirm whether there's an informant or not an informant because we've never been told nor given documents. And in fact, we've never even asked for the name of any informants or any sources whatsoever. So if any of that is true, if they ran a spy ring or an informant ring and they were paying people within the Trump campaign, if any of that is true, that is an absolute red line. There is not an honest person in this country who can believe that taxpayer dollars going to fund this ring and operate like this, like what's said in the New York Times, I think it would have quite a bit of detail on it. If any of that is true, this is a red line in this country. You can't do this to political campaigns. But I mean, this was done. I mean, according to them, this was done in the spring. I mean, before the counterintelligence investigation was even open. If that's true, we need to know about it.
So, well, the New York Times reports and the Washington Post that somebody was paid. Somebody was paid, and they were interacting with the Trump campaign. You want to call it spying? Fine. But somebody was paid. Isn't that right? That's what the New York Times says.
If they paid someone, it's an absolute red line, and this is over with. I mean, I don't know how to say this. I mean, there is no possible way that we should be allowing, even if it was legal, we should never allow this in this country. Congress should not allow for anything like this to ever occur again to any political campaign if it in fact happened, which is why I'll say again, all they got to do is provide us the documentation. If they didn't do anything like that, provide us a document so we can verify it.
Well, when you say this is over, what do you mean this is over? I mean, we have criminal referrals from the Inspector General
what I'm saying is it's over. And when I say it's over, meaning that this whole thing is a scam. I mean, that there's real FISA abuse here. If there is real, I mean, the real FISA abuse, I just can't imagine if what's in these stories is true. How can any American stand for this? And look, we're a separate branch of government. We set up these capabilities. We have a responsibility to oversee these capabilities. And I'll tell you, there is not an honest person in this country that thinks it's okay if sources, informants, whatever you want to call them, go around and start passing out money all over the globe to do what? To secretly put yourself into a presidential campaign. That's not acceptable in this country.
How far up the line does this go? We know that Loretta Lynch and Sally Yates were briefed on the Trump campaign in 2016, in the spring of 2016. We know from Peter Strzok texts that he said, and I quote, President Obama wants to know everything we're doing on this. And we know that Peter Strzok told Lisa Page we need an insurance policy should Donald Trump win the presidency. So who was calling the shots here?
Well, look, there's a lot of abuse here, and so they were briefed in the spring. So we know that the FBI briefed the highest levels of the Obama administration in the spring of 2016. Shortly after that, you have Mr. Steele that gets going. He's being paid by the Clinton campaign secretly. He's also meeting with the FBI. He's digging up what ends up being totally phony dirt, by the way, who he claims got it from Russians. And so I don't know how clearly I can possibly say this. If anybody's looking for collusion, all they have to do between the Russians and a political party, all they have to do is figure out if, in fact, Christopher Steele talked to Russians, because there you have your collusion. They took information from Russians and they used it against the president, President Trump.
And the Democrats
and then they started, and the Democrats paid for it all.
Yeah.
And this is so I don't even know what they're investigating at this point.
So wouldn't Robert Mueller be looking at then? I mean, Robert Mueller's investigation has turned one. It is 1 year old this last week. Would he have looked at collusion between Hillary Clinton and the Russians then, or is that not his mandate?
I doubt it, because, I mean, they've never even looked into, there's all this talk about leaks. What about the leak of General Flynn's phone call with the Russian ambassador? What about that leak? Why don't we start there with leaks?
Yeah, well, that we know is a felony. Well, real quick, the IG report is forthcoming. What are you expecting from that IG report? Will justice be served?
You know, I don't have any idea. This is the Clinton email investigation. I have not met with Mr. Horowitz. I don't even know exactly what he's looking at other than what I've read in the press. But I can tell you the cast of characters that are involved in that investigation are the same cast of characters that we are investigating at the House Intelligence Committee as we look into FISA abuse and counterintelligence operations.
And you're also investigating the State Department. Anything new there?
Yeah, so, well, that's the interesting thing about the State Department is we're trying to figure out how did this information make it over from London to the FBI. We've never been able to put that together because we were told many times, and this was all over, you know, it was leaked, oh, these were trusted Five Eyes sources and, you know, intelligence products. Well, as you know, we never found any intelligence products as it relates to our Five Eyes partners sending us information. So how did it get through? Well, we thank the State Department because we have people talking about this, you know, former State Department officials talking about this. So if that indeed happened, now we have something that's totally irregular. So now you're taking information from the State Department, you're opening up a counterintelligence investigation into a political campaign. That is, to say the least, it's irregular.
And we should point out that on this program, you said in the past that Sidney Blumenthal and Mr. Scherer, Cody Scherer, were actually funneling information to the State Department.
Right. You kind of have you kind of have all kinds of people, right? You've got Christopher Steele working for the Democrats in the Hillary Clinton campaign. You've got Blumenthal and others who are tied and affiliated with the Clinton operation. And then on the other side, you have the FBI. They're all about at the same time running investigations into Carter Page. I mean, it's very odd.
You make a lot of good points, Mr. Chairman.
Brennan was the instigator. He was running all over Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill, pushing the dossier together with his partner, James Clapper, and that will come out.
There's the formation of an alternative government. Spies run amok, if you like, gaining information, getting secrets on people to use as weapons. It's more than disturbing. It's outrageous.
It is more than outrageous. It's treasonous, Ashley. The fact is 8 days before President Obama walks out the door, he gives the NSA, as you pointed out, and Loretta Lynch, his Attorney General, signed the directive, but it was approved by Jim Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, as well as Brennan, the CIA Director, and the Director of NSA, to release that information to 16 different intelligence agencies. Now, what that did is that was a trapdoor set up. They already knew that General Flynn had talked to the Russian ambassador, and it was a trapdoor to set up so they could distribute it, and then they'd have a lot of people that would leak it. And this is very, very dangerous, and it should be examined by not only the administration but by the Congress.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, sabotage is what it is.
This is big as and dangerous as Watergate. It is. It is because an administration that left trap doors that was endangering the United States and our national security. Those are treasonous acts. That's why this can be as big or bigger than Watergate. The fact is, Susan Rice is the key to the politicization of the intelligence community and how all these names have been unmasked, and how the increase from 2011, when the Obama administration loosened up on the criteria for unmasking them, and then now last year there were over 30,000 searches on American citizens that was never intended by the FISA courts. She is the key to answer all these questions.
But let's focus.
The Russian collusion deception that's going on was pulled out by the Democrats so we wouldn't look at what they had done to the politicization of the intelligence community. And they've been fairly effective, although nothing's shown up in the Russian collusion. This is the great deception. There's no question that, that Hillary Clinton violated the Espionage Act, and perhaps the president violated the Espionage Act by using that server. Now, I was hunting for the right words to get it, but it's that simple. And once you open that door, and I believe Susan Rice is the key to the start of opening that door, then everything's going to become very transparent of how they use the intelligence community for political purposes.
Yeah, you got to open the door, but you also got to get her to testify. Do you think she'll be subpoenaed quickly?
Well, she should be. Absolutely.
Okay. General Thomas McInerney. McInerney, good to see you, General. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
This whole thing has been a charade. It is tactical deception. They do not want the Trump administration to start looking in at the violation of the Espionage Act by Hillary Clinton with her rogue server, and by the president, who used a pseudonym on her rogue server, and they both are in violation of the Espionage Act. They do not want this to come out. So they have brought up all these other facts about Russia and why they lost the election. But that's where the trouble is, let alone the Clinton Foundation. That is a huge pay for
business deal.
What about the fact that you're supposed to go to jail if you unmask any of these people who are incidentally collected on these calls?
Absolutely. That's another criminal offense. And so I think the special prosecutor ought to start looking at Hillary Clinton's rogue server that was never given an ATO, which is authority to operate. Yeah. And she had over 2,000 classified emails, 200 class SAT emails, and that's in violation of the Espionage Act.
General McInerney, thank you for your insight. We appreciate your time, sir.
These new text messages, collusion, delusion, new documents show Obama officials and the FBI coordinated in the anti-Trump probe.
The DOJ and the FBI have not been forthright with the information. I think this information is explosive. Why? Because it shows that even when Brennan briefed Harry Reid, went to meet with him in the Gang of Eight, that was in August 2016, that early that month, at the beginning of August, we know that Jonathan Moffa, who was working with the counterintelligence division of the FBI, working alongside Peter Strzok and was probably Peter Strzok's supervisor, according to my sources, actually went to the White House to have a meeting with Denis McDonough, who was the chief of staff for President Obama. And what's so fascinating about that is that he entered the White House early in the morning that August, goes into the White House with 3 other people who are not named on the White House logs, and then doesn't check out until like 11:59 that night. So we don't even know what time he left. But he meets with Denis McDonough, and it is apparently about this, the Russia investigation. And that puts him just 1 degree of separation from the president, because Denis McDonough is his chief of staff. So President Obama was very well aware, according to the sources that I've spoken with, at least they believe he was very well aware of what was going on in the beginnings of this investigation.
There was coordination between Loretta Lynch's DOJ and the FBI. How do you know?
Well, I mean, we know because we have a number of documents, a growing body of evidence, Brian, that now would suggest that Director Comey, who under sworn testimony a number of times have said there was no coordination between Loretta Lynch's DOJ and our FBI investigation. Not only was that false, but we know that over and over again now we have emails that would suggest that that testimony was false and at best misled the American public, at worst was lying to Congress. And here we are today with emails, text messages that says that even the no coordination message that Director Comey put out on that infamous day in July was actually suggested by the Department of Justice.
Here's the text. Timing looks like hell, Peter Strzok says to Lisa Page, will appear choreographed. All major news networks literally leading with the AG to accept the FBI director's recommendation. Yeah, this is awful. Nothing we can do about it. I mean, this is like a third-rate movie playing out on text messages. These people are supposed to be guarding our secrets and seeking truth and justice. They don't even know how to secure their own texts.
Well, it's interesting that they would go back and forth saying that the timing looks awful, but there's even another email from the Department of Justice that would indicate that on how to articulate the exoneration of Hillary Clinton. And so as we look at that, there's also additional evidence that would suggest that DOJ narrowed the scope of the Hillary investigation to make sure that she was exonerated.
Mark Meadows, thanks for joining us. Keep that staff working because we need to get the facts. Appreciate it.
The abuses at the Obama Justice Department and FBI in front of the FISA court go to the bone of the function of the Justice Department. And the key to this, the key to the lying and the misrepresentations to the FISA court is going to be John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, and the senior officials at the Justice Department. When there is a federal grand jury, in addition to the Nunes committee investigation into the State Department, people will be forced by subpoena to give testimony as senior Department of State officials who are currently there or who have left. I think it will be demonstrated that they colluded with Clinton administration representatives and campaign officials and people like Sidney Blumenthal and Cody Shearer, who passed on completely unreliable information, which they hoped would be passed along to the FBI, and in fact it was, and that information was used fraudulently to obtain FISA warrants. This is why, Lou, the only way to get these answers, once the Nunes committee is done, is to have a federal grand jury force all of these State Department people, CIA, DNI people, FBI, DOJ senior people, under oath in a grand jury. It's the only way we're ever going to get the full story.
And to add another twist, Lou, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, is a witness. He should be recused from this altogether because he's going to have to testify why he signed a FISA application.
Comey and Strzok and all of those people, including senior Justice Department officials, this was a plot, a brazen plot to exonerate Hillary Clinton in the email server case, to ensure that she became president. And if by chance she lost, part of the plot was to frame Donald Trump with a false crime. And that's why the Steele dossier was used. It was designed to create a false narrative about Trump and his people and to be used ultimately against them if Hillary Clinton lost. This is why this is the single most important scandal of the last 50 years, because senior DOJ and FBI officials engaged in conduct that was designed to corrupt an American presidential election. It wasn't the Russians who corrupted the presidential election. It was the American officials at the Department of Justice and the FBI.
I think we have ample facts revealed to us during this last year and a half that high-ranking people throughout the government, not just the FBI, high-ranking people had a plot to not have Hillary Clinton, indicted so that she could remain the flawed candidate that she was, which in my view was stupidity. And they also had and even this Strzok guy talked about this. They had a backup plan to basically frame Donald Trump. Right. And that's what's been going on. This whole thing, in my view, is just total phony. I mean, how would you feel, someone out there in America land, if somebody was just had a phony scheme about you and went on for months and months and months?
Yeah,
and that's what's going on.
We're going to discover that the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, her deputy, Sally Yates, the head of the National Security Division, John Carlin, Bruce Orr, and other senior DOJ officials and, regrettably, line attorneys, people who were senior career civil servants, violated the law, perhaps committed crimes, and covered up crimes by a presidential candidate. But more than that, they tried to frame an incoming president with a false Russian conspiracy that never existed, and they knew it, and they plotted to ruin him as a candidate and then destroy him as a president. That's why this is important. That's why connecting the dots is important, because the FBI now has to be completely reconstructed from the ground up. The men and women at the Bureau are great people. That's not who we're talking about. We never have been. We are talking about people like James Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page, Baker, Priestap, who is a name nobody knows. He's the head of the counterintelligence division, and he was the one who was involved in planning this entire crazy thing involving Fusion GPS, the false dossier, and creating evidence. This is what people have to understand. What the Bureau did was, by working with Fusion GPS and giving contractors access to highly classified information which they had no legal right to see, they needed to create something they could give to the court, the Foreign Intelligence Court, so that they could get wiretaps and surveillance taps and email taps and phone taps on the Trump people, so that if there was anything, they could find it out. Of course, there was nothing. There never was anything. And they created false facts so that they could get surveillance warrants. Those are all crimes. Every single one of those acts constitutes a crime because it was done not for a legitimate law enforcement reason, not for national security reasons, but to create a false case against a candidate, Donald Trump, a president-elect, Donald Trump, and a president, Donald Trump. The FISA court opinion of April 27th of 2017 outlines a series of illegal disclosures to contractors. It is believed that among those contractors were Fusion GPS and CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is the company that was used to bleach Hillary's computer. CrowdStrike, if what is being reported is true, and I've seen 2 reports about CrowdStrike being among the private contractors that were given access to raw 702 incidental collection of American citizens under FISA warrants. If that is true, they have committed crimes. The Bureau who gave them information committed crimes. There is huge civil liability for CrowdStrike and for the FBI officials. And there is, right now, there's at least 2 lawsuits pending against Mr. Steele, the former MI6 agent who wrote the Steele dossier at the payment of Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS has been sued. I expect if these facts come out from the FISA court showing that these contractors got this information, they will all be sued. Now, they may declare bankruptcy and not be able to pay, but the people don't realize that this is already on the public record, that these things happen. The question which has been blanked out from this opinion, as you can see, this is all dark, all through the opinion. What they've done is they've blanked out the names of the contractors and the names of the FBI and DOJ officials who broke the law. That is going to come out. That's what Nunes has. He has all that information now. He knows what's in these blanks that the court blanked out. The court did the right thing. It's not supposed to reveal that. But once you start doing oversight, constitutional oversight, those blanks go away to Congress. And we will know shortly who the private contractors were that were allowed to break the law by the FBI. This is as bad as it gets. When you have the government, the FBI and the DOJ being absolutely corrupted because of their motivations, and when you have the journalistic community being bought, it seems to me that's pretty bad for all the institutions involved. And journalism is now below Congress in terms of approval ratings. This is not going to help them. What's fascinating to me is how the people who want to defend everything that the Bureau has done or the Department of Justice or the Clintons have turned to a series of narratives to replace the truth. For example, once this whole thing broke, when President Trump said, "I was spied on by the President of the United States," he was laughed at. In fact, he was spied on by the President of the United States, by Barack Obama, under Barack Obama's orders, and under the orders of John Brennan, and Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, and Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, and Ben Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor. Because what they did, which was part of a scheme which began in the year 2016, was to try to figure out a way to help Hillary Clinton get elected by exonerating her in her email scandal in her private server in New York, and then she would be elected, and then the problem of Donald Trump would go away. The problem was she lost. And when she lost, they had time between the election in November of 2016 and the time between the president was inaugurated to try and do damage, to cover up what they had done with Fusion GPS and a bunch of other people before the election, and to make it perfect after the election, to secure the storyline. And so, interestingly enough, people, there are some real heroes in this story. And part of it is how you defeat these competing narratives. You'll recall that first there's the story about the dossier, the so-called Fusion GPS dossier, which we now know was developed with the assistance of the FBI, Christopher Steele, the former spy from England, Bruce Orr, a senior Justice Department official in the Obama administration, Bruce Orr's wife, who was an employee of Fusion GPS and a Russian expert. That all of a sudden became something that people got worried about on the Democratic side and on the protect the Clinton side. Then all of a sudden, when the the dossier got even stronger and stronger as a result of the knowledge about Bruce Orr's involvement. The dialogue shifted. And then it became that the dossier really wasn't important because George Papadopoulos, this know-nothing young guy who had been a end-of-the-room foreign policy advisor, was the real guy who got the investigation into the president's collusion with the Russians started as a result of a drunken blathering in a bar to the Australian ambassador, who then told MI6 in London. These narratives have developed because the facts are now so strong that there was a brazen plot to exonerate Hillary Clinton, and then if she lost, frame the President of the United States with a false crime, that this is what they have been forced to do. One of the heroes in this entire story is Admiral Mike Rogers, the head of the National Security Agency. He became the head of the National Security Agency in 2014. In 2015, one of the auditors at the National Security Agency, our electronic surveillance SIGINT masterpiece from World War II, came to him and said, there's some funny things going on at the FBI with regard to 702, which of course is that part of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows the scooping up of huge amounts of phone call data and emails and electronic data about foreigners. And in the course of that, allows the incidental collection of information about Americans, which is supposed to be kept secret, but wasn't in this case because of the conduct of the FBI and the Obama administration Justice Department officials. Mike Rogers says, okay, let's do an audit. He does this in March of 2016. This is way in advance of the election. He then discovers, as a result of the audit, that the FBI has been sharing this secret data about Americans with not other government agencies, but private contractors. Some of those contractors apparently work for the Democratic National Committee. Some of them work for Fusion GPS. Mr. Rogers, Admiral Rogers, says, okay, the court, the FISC court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, has been lied to. They have not been told about this. And things have been told to them which are not true. He said, I'm going to the court. I'm going to tell the court. Rogers goes to the court on his own and informs the court about these problems. Now, prior to him being able to do that, the Justice Department and the FBI learn about what he's done, about the audit and what he's discovered. And so they go to the court first to inform the court that they have discovered these problems with illegal activity. Doesn't make any difference. It's too late. The court now knows what has happened. So he goes to the court, they go to the court, and then in April of 2016, the FISA court issues this 99-page opinion, which I'll bet you didn't even know about until I talked about it this morning. This opinion describes illegal activity by the FBI, illegal activity by contractors, and it calls it the improper disclosure of raw intelligence about Americans to unauthorized individuals. All of those things that the Bureau did and the contractors were crimes. Now, you wouldn't think, this is a public document now. It's been declassified. You have not seen a single story about this in the Washington Post or the New York Times. So, with this in hand, and remember, Rogers knows all about this before the election. So as soon as the election is held, Rogers determines that since there is now a president-elect who has been spied upon, he knows that Trump was the subject of a plot. So Admiral Rogers goes to visit President-elect Trump in New York in November of 2016, on the 17th of November. He's the head of the NSA. He briefs the president. And it is after that briefing, the very next day, that President-elect Trump moves his entire staff out of Trump Tower to Bedminster, New Jersey, where his golf club is, and that's where the transition team stays until Trump Tower is debugged. What Admiral Rogers did was, and this is why the president said that President Obama had wiretapped him. Rogers, on that day, November 17th, briefed the president about the illegal activities which had been reported to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court earlier in the year. And the president knew what had happened at that point. Now, interestingly enough, when the outgoing administration found that Admiral Rogers had gone to New York, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, John Clapper, and John Brennan, the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, asked President Obama to fire Admiral Rogers. Now, President Obama had many flaws, but he ain't no dummy. And he said, boys, it's too late. I'm not going to fire Admiral Rogers, because if I do, that'll be the only story about my last days in office, so you can forget it. And Rogers is there to this day, and when this story is written, when it's all over, the great hero will not be Robert Mueller, this crazy man that has been made the special counsel. It won't be the people on the Hill, except for Devin Nunes, who is a real hero, who has stood up under the most incredible personal attacks from real sleazeballs like Adam Schiff, this loony congressman from California. And it will be shown that Admiral Rogers saved the day by forcing the senior Justice Department officials to admit that they had done wrong things. Now, there's another fascinating part of this story. In October of 2016, when Admiral Rogers is going to the court and forcing the Justice Department to advise the court that they had submitted false documents, that they, the DOJ, had submitted, unwittingly had submitted false documents, as they say. Admiral Rogers, plans are being made to fire him at that point, which of course never go forward because of what he does by going to New York. All of this has come to a head at that point, and the court is now learning for the first time about this unbelievable activity. For the first time in the history of the FISA court, it has been lied to, and according to the court, systematically and ongoing violations of the law. This is stunning stuff, and it's all because of Admiral Rogers. And that's where we are today. We are now at the point where Nunes has discovered this. He discovered it back in March when he went to the White House, and all of these documents were turned over to him by the incoming National Security Council staff. And so now we'll watch it play out. By the way, in October of 2016, the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the National Security Division at Justice for the Obama administration, and the person who was responsible for signing the pleadings that went to the court, was a fellow named John Carlin. Once this material was submitted to the court in October of 2016, revealing the violations of the law, Carlin resigned and has not been heard from since. No one could figure out why Carlin resigned. And I don't know why he resigned. There was plenty of time left in the administration. He just left. Now, it may have been that you resigned because you don't want to be questioned by the Inspector General, who at that point had already begun an investigation of the FBI and the DOJ senior people based on Admiral Rogers' complaints. So that's another story that's going to play out. Where is John Carlin and what is he doing? The Russian collusion was a complete fabrication of the Democratic National Committee, the Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS, senior DOJ and FBI officials to create a way to dirty up Trump as a candidate and then destroy him as a president. There is literally no evidence whatsoever that has ever been produced of any conspiracy. And let me just say something that I find deeply offensive. The appointment of the special counsel was completely unnecessary. There was no need for a special counsel. I don't know why Rod Rosenstein did it, but he did it. But there was no justification for it. And in fact, in his appointment letter and memorandum about it, he admits there's no crime that's been discovered, but for political reasons, this needs to be investigated. Well, that's just utter nonsense. Look what he's done to an incoming president. Look at what he's done to the country by appointing a special counsel. That should have been handed off to a bunch of senior DOJ officials who were being monitored by a political appointee who would keep them within the legitimate bounds of an investigation. Mueller has not brought one charge involving collusion with Russians. He's never going to bring a charge involving collusion because there was none. The bottom line is this. Mueller and the way he has conducted his investigation is an embarrassment to anyone who's ever been a special counsel, which I was. I was an independent counsel. Hiring all of these partisan Democrats to conduct the investigation, he's not naive. But Bob Mueller's been around too long. You can't be that dumb to not realize how horrible it is to have these people. These people are not biased against the president. They have an animus toward the president. There is a distinct difference. I believe that his entire investigation, Mueller's entire investigation, has been tainted by this animus. There's no way you can have people who have donated to the Clintons, donated to Obama, represented the Clinton Foundation, represented Clinton individuals in criminal investigations, and then have those people who have given to President Trump's opponent investigate President Trump. I don't know what Mueller is thinking of.
Since you're bringing up the Mueller investigation and the apparent focus on investigating Trump's Russian collusion, isn't it interesting that Mueller and Comey and Rosenstein and others were involved in a Russia collusion story for Obama Clinton?
Mueller, first of all, never should have been appointed because there was no need for a special counsel. That's number one. Number two, he never should have been appointed because he knows James Comey. They're personal and professional friends and have been so for many years. Comey is a target of this investigation. He's clearly been involved in activities which could be deemed illegal and criminal. There's no way Mueller can investigate him or anybody else at the senior people that he worked with. And yet, here he is investigating Russian collusion when he presided over, as FBI director, the investigation into Uranium One, which was a clear kickback bribery scheme by the Russians to bribe Bill Clinton as ex-president with speech money, to bribe Hillary Clinton with speech money for her husband and $145 million in contributions to the Clinton Foundation, and to get a result of selling 20% of the uranium supply of the United States to a Russian-controlled company. The notion that Mueller could investigate that, having been a party to the investigation, is ridiculous. But here's the other thing. Mueller, who was FBI director at the time, knew about the Uranium One investigation of Russian corruption and bribery. Did he go to tell James Comey or anybody at the Justice Department that this case was under investigation and that they should warn CFIUS, the committee that approves foreign investment? Did he go? And if he went to see somebody in the Justice Department, like, let's say he went to see Eric Holder, and Eric Holder, who sits on CFIUS, says, I don't think that's relevant to the sale of Uranium One. Or did Eric say, okay, fine, I'll let him know. We do not know what CFIUS was told about Uranium One. There have been published reports that they were told nothing about it. And here's the other part of this. If Mueller knew that this was there, why didn't he go to CFIUS on his own and say, I don't know what you're being told, but I'm going to report to you that this is pretty serious stuff and you need to know about it? He didn't do that. Why didn't Mueller do that? And so what we're left with is this nagging sensation that all of a sudden these really great investigators lose all of their skills and nobody talks to anybody about Uranium One. The other thing is this. Everybody always says in defense of Hillary, well, she was only one of 9. There were 9 agencies. But they forget the most important fact of all. It only takes one vote to stop a deal. Hers. And you know what? She was bought. She wasn't going to vote no. She knew about the bribery that was going on. Her husband was involved in it. She could have stopped the Uranium One sale with one vote. That's all it takes in CFIUS. If one member of CFIUS, 1 of 9, says no, it is done. She didn't vote no, and she could have. So the answer to this is, it's not that she was 1 of 9, it's that she was 1 of 9, and she didn't stop it.